Okay, so apparently I'm the bad guy now. But let me tell you what actually happened. Because everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster, when really, I just got tired of walking on eggshells around a man who refused to leave his own self-made prison. I'm Stella. I'm 32. And honestly, I thought I was being the most patient wife in the world for 5 whole years. But apparently, my patience wasn't enough to fill the void he called a soul. Our marriage didn't start with a ghost. It started with a fire. Roman was a creator, a man whose hands smelled of sawdust and varnish. His passion was bespoke furniture design, and his studio wasn't just a business, it was the heart of our world. He'd come home, eyes blazing with ideas, and talk for hours about the grain of a specific wood, the curve of a chair leg. He was alive. We were alive. Then came the failure. The big commission, the one that was supposed to put his name on the map, fell through spectacularly. A soulless corporation bought out his client, and they wanted mass-produced junk, not handcrafted art. The studio bled money for 6 months before he finally had to close the doors. And just like that, the fire went out. He didn't just lose a business, he lost his language. The man who came home to me each night was a stranger, a quiet, hollowed-out version of my husband who moved through our Vienna apartment like a phantom. He got a dreary 9-to-5 job in logistics management, a field he despised, and left a piece of himself at that office every single day. The smell of sawdust was replaced by the sterile scent of photocopier toner. Our evenings became a ritual of silence. He'd eat what I cooked without comment, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond my shoulder. He'd scroll through his phone, the blue light casting an eerie glow on his blank face. I tried. God, did I try. Roman, let's go away for the weekend. Just us. He'd shake his head, not even looking up. I'm tired, Stella. There's a new exhibit at the Belvedere. You used to love going. Maybe next week. But next week never came. I suggested therapy, and he looked at me as if I'd suggested he amputate a limb. I'm not broken, he'd say, the words clipped and cold. But he was. He was shattered, and he wouldn't let me near the pieces. I was living with a ghost of a man, and the loneliness was a physical ache, a constant pressure behind my ribs. Then I met Victor. As a gallery curator, I meet artists all the time, but Victor was different. He wasn't just an artist, he was a force of nature. His canvases were huge, chaotic explosions of color and emotion. He was preparing for a solo exhibition at my gallery, and from our first meeting, the air between us crackled. He was everything Roman wasn't. He was loud, he was present. He saw me. That color on you, he said one afternoon, gesturing to my emerald green dress with a paint-stained finger. It's defiant. I love it. Roman hadn't noticed a new dress in 2 years. Victor listened. When I talked about the frustrations of gallery politics, he leaned in, his eyes intense. When I made a joke, he threw his head back and laughed, a loud, genuine sound that seemed to shake the room. He made me feel visible. The affair wasn't a decision, it was an inevitability. It happened one rainy Thursday, after we'd spent the day hanging his paintings. The gallery was closed, the city lights blurred through the large glass windows. We were sharing a bottle of wine, and the conversation flowed so easily it felt like we'd known each other for a lifetime. He reached across the table and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was electric. You're wasted on him, you know, he murmured, his voice a low rumble. He didn't have to ask who he was. He just knew. Later that night, in his studio overlooking the Danube Canal, surrounded by the smell of oil paint and turpentine, I felt alive for the first time in years. It wasn't a betrayal. It felt like a resuscitation. It was a breath of air after being held underwater for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe. My life split into two. 2 Stellas existed, running on parallel tracks that I prayed would never intersect. There was the Stella, who lived with Victor. That Stella was vibrant, laughing, desired. We'd meet in discreet little cafes in the 7th District, our hands clasped under the table. We'd spend long afternoons in his studio, making love on a paint-splattered drop cloth, the chaotic energy of his art seeping into us. With him, the world was in technicolor. He'd text me in the middle of the day, thinking of your smile. Or, saw a shade of blue that reminded me of your eyes. It was intoxicating. It was a drug. And then there was the Stella who came home to Roman. that Stella was a ghost, just like him. I'd walk into our apartment, the silence hitting me like a physical wall. The vibrant woman I was with Victor would shrink, her colors fading to gray. I'd put on a performance of domesticity, asking about his day, knowing I'd only get a one-word answer. Fine. The contrast was staggering. One night, I left Victor's bed, my skin still humming from his touch, and came home to find Roman asleep on the sofa, the television flickering over his impassive face. I stood there, watching him, and I felt nothing but a profound, aching pity, and a surge of resentment. This was his fault. His withdrawal, his refusal to fight for us, had pushed me away. I started to believe my own lie, that this affair was saving me. It was giving me the strength to endure the emptiness at home. The joy I felt with Victor was a life raft, and I convinced myself that I was bringing some of that light back into my marriage. I was more cheerful, more tolerant of Roman's moods. I was a better wife, I told myself, because I was no longer starving for affection, but the lies began to fray at the edges. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Victor. A picture of a new painting he'd started, with the caption, "Inspired by last night." My heart leaped. I looked over at Roman, but he was staring at his laptop, oblivious. My thumb hovered over the delete button. A small thrill of danger shot through me. Then came the close calls. A call from Victor that I had to quickly reject when Roman walked into the room. A lingering scent of Victor's cologne on my coat that I frantically tried to air out. I told Roman I was at a late gallery event when I was really at Victor's studio. The lies piled up, each one a brick in the wall I was building between my husband and me. The thrill was slowly being replaced by a low, constant hum of anxiety. I was becoming a stranger to myself. The end came not with a bang, but with a terrifying stillness. I came home late one Tuesday. I'd been with Victor, and the evening had been perfect. We'd had dinner, we'd walked along the river, and I felt light, carefree. I opened the door to our apartment and knew, instantly, that something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy. All the lights were off, except for a single lamp in the living room, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. And Roman was sitting there, in his favorite armchair, just sitting, in the dark. My heart began to pound against my ribs. "Roman? You scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark?" He didn't answer. He just gestured with his head towards the coffee table. And I saw it. My phone, face up, the screen was lit, displaying the last conversation between Victor and me. A string of messages from that very afternoon, filled with "I miss yous" and "I can't wait to see yous" and other damning intimate whispers. I had forgotten to delete them. Such a stupid, careless mistake. I felt the blood drain from my face, the world tilted on its axis. I opened my mouth to say something, a denial, an excuse, anything, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? He finally looked at me. His eyes weren't filled with rage or jealousy or even sadness. They were empty, completely and utterly vacant. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. He spoke, and his voice was unnaturally calm. A quiet, flat tone that cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "How long, Stella?" Not, "Who is he?" Not, "Why did you do this?" Just, "How long?" The question wasn't an accusation. It was a request for data, an inventory of my betrayal. "Roman, I can explain," I stammered, the words feeling clumsy and useless in my mouth. He held up a hand, a gesture that was both weary and absolute. It stopped me cold. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want the lies. He slowly pushed himself out of the chair, his movements stiff, like an old man's. He walked past me, not even a brush of his arm against mine. He walked to the guest bedroom at the end of the hall, the room we kept for visiting family. He opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the silent apartment. It was a small sound, a final sound, and it was the beginning of my punishment. I thought he would yell. I thought the storm would break, that we would have a terrible, cathartic fight, smashing plates and screaming until our throats were raw. And then, maybe, we could start to pick up the pieces. I was wrong. What he gave me was so much worse. He gave me silence. He continued to live in our home, but he had erased me from his reality. He moved through the apartment like I was a ghost, a piece of furniture he no longer saw. He'd wake up before me, leave for work, and come home late. He'd make himself a simple dinner, a sandwich, a bowl of soup, and eat it standing in the kitchen, staring out the window. He washed his own clothes, keeping them in a separate basket. He slept in the guest room every single night. He never spoke to me. He never looked at me. If I was in the hallway when he walked through, he would stare at the wall opposite me, his body angled slightly away, as if to avoid accidental contact. At first, I was defiant. I told myself it was a childish tantrum, he'd get over it. So I tried to provoke him. I'd wear the dress Victor loved, a little too revealing for a night at home. I'd hum a song Victor and I had listened to. I even, in a moment of cruel desperation, let my phone ring and said loudly, "Oh, it's just Victor from the gallery." Nothing. Not a flicker of emotion. Not a clench of his jaw. It was like shouting at a brick wall. The defiance curdled into desperation. I started trying to win him back. I cooked his favorite meal, Wiener Schnitzel, the aroma filling the apartment with memories of happier times. I set the table with our best china. He walked in, saw the table, and without a word, turned around and left the apartment. He came back hours later, long after I had thrown the cold food in the bin. I left little notes for him. "I'm sorry. Please talk to me." They remained untouched where I left them. The silence was a living thing. It filled every corner of our home. It sat between us at the breakfast table. It lay beside me in our cold, empty bed. It screamed in my ears until I thought I would go mad. My relationship with Victor disintegrated under the strain. How could I lose myself in passion when my home was a psychological torture chamber? The joy was gone, replaced by a gnawing guilt. Victor became impatient. "What is wrong with you, Stella? You're a million miles away." I couldn't explain it to him. I couldn't tell him that his rival wasn't fighting me for my affection, he was simply nullifying my existence. Eventually, I stopped answering Victor's calls. The affair that had felt like my salvation now felt like the anchor dragging me down. The breaking point came after 3 weeks of this silent treatment. I cornered him in the kitchen one morning. I stood in front of the door, blocking his exit. "Damn it, Roman, say something," I screamed, my voice cracking. "Yell at me, hate me, call me a whore, just say something." I started to sob, ugly, heaving gasps. I slid down the door and sat crumpled on the floor, begging. "Please, Roman, please, I can't take this anymore, just talk to me." He stood there for a long moment. I looked up through my tears, hoping, praying to see something in his eyes. There was nothing. He calmly reached around me, turned the doorknob, opened the door, and stepped over me as if I were a pile of laundry on the floor. He left for work without a backward glance. That was the moment I knew I hadn't just broken his heart. I had killed whatever was left inside him that cared about me at all. The silence didn't just break me, it incinerated me. It burned away all my excuses, all my self-pity, all the carefully constructed lies I had told myself. There was nothing left but the ugly, scorched truth. The first thing I did was end it with Victor. I sent him a single, blunt text. "It's over. Don't contact me again." It was cowardly, but I didn't have the strength for a conversation. He was a symptom of the disease, not the cause. The cause was me. That evening, I waited for Roman. I didn't cook. I didn't set the table. I just sat in the same armchair where he had sat on that terrible night, and I waited. When he came home, I stood up before he could retreat to his sanctuary of silence. I stood in his path, my body trembling. "You're not walking away this time," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You are going to listen." End quote. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, his eyes met mine. They were filled with an infinite, bone-deep weariness. But he stayed. He listened, and I told him everything. Not the curated, self-serving version. The real version. I told him how lonely I was, how his silence after the business failed had felt like a rejection. I told him how meeting Victor felt like coming up for air. And then I told him the most important part, that none of it was an excuse. That I was weak and selfish. That I had chosen the easiest path instead of fighting for the hardest one, which was fighting for us. I cried. Not the hysterical sobs of before, but silent, bitter tears of shame that rolled down my cheeks. "I destroyed us, Roman," I finished, my voice raw. "I know that. And I am so, so sorry. I would do anything, to take it back. Please, just give me one more chance to fix this." He was quiet for a long time. just watching me. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was thoughtful. Then, he finally spoke, and his voice was gentle, which was somehow more devastating than anger. "The silence, Stella," he began softly. "It wasn't to punish you. Not at first." He took a breath. "I know I disappeared. After the studio closed, I lost myself. I was ashamed. I felt like a failure, and I didn't know how to talk to you without feeling that shame. I was wrong to shut you out, I see that now. Have it?" A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. He sees it. He understands. "About 3 months ago," he continued, his gaze drifting towards the window, "I started seeing a therapist, secretly. I didn't want to tell you until I felt like I was making real progress. I was trying to come back to you, Stella. I was trying to find my way back." My hope flared brighter. This was it. This was the turning point. Then he looked back at me, and the gentle sadness in his eyes extinguished that hope forever. "The night I found the messages, I had just booked a trip for us, a week in Florence. I was going to tell you that night. I was going to tell you I was getting help, that I was sorry, and that I wanted to start again. I wanted to fight for us." He paused, and the weight of his next words crushed me. "But then I saw your phone, and I realized something. You didn't have an affair because I was distant. You had an affair because when things got hard, you looked for an escape. You didn't want to fix what was broken. You just wanted something new." The silence, after that night, it wasn't punishment anymore. He looked at me, his eyes clear and resolved for the first time in years. It was me mourning our marriage. It was me saying goodbye. He walked over to the sideboard and picked up a thick manila envelope. He placed it on the coffee table between us. "These are the divorce papers," he said, his voice steady. "I've already signed them." The divorce was quiet and efficient, just like Roman. He moved out, taking only his personal belongings, leaving behind the furniture he had once lovingly built for us. Our friends, who I had assumed would be neutral, had clearly heard his side of the story. The invitations stopped coming. The sympathetic phone calls went to him. I was the villain, the cheating wife who had kicked a man when he was down. In their eyes, I was unforgivable. I was left alone in the apartment, a cavern of echoes and memories. The silence Roman had imposed on me for a month became my permanent companion. It was no longer a punishment from him, it was a state of being, my own personal hell. I finally understood. His silence hadn't been an act of aggression. It had been an act of self-preservation. While I was screaming for his attention, he was quietly detaching, cauterizing the wound I had inflicted, preparing for a life without me. He wasn't punishing me, he was saving himself. About 6 months after he left, I saw him. I was huddled in a small cafe, trying to escape a sudden downpour. I looked out the rain-streaked window, and there he was, walking under a shared umbrella with a woman. He was holding it for her, his head angled down as he listened to what she was saying. And then he smiled. It wasn't the ghost of a smile I had seen for the past 2 years. It was a real one. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. It was bright and unburdened. He looked peaceful. He looked free. He looked happy. They walked past, disappearing into the crowd, and he never saw me sitting there, watching the life I had thrown away. I stayed in that cafe for a long time, the cold coffee untouched in front of me, and I finally realized the truth. The true punishment wasn't the month he refused to speak to me. The true punishment is this: the rest of my life, spent in the deafening echo of my own choices. He found his voice again, with someone else, and I am left with nothing but the silence.